Good evening and welcome to the Lost Lake Run webinar. I appreciate you coming in tonight. This evening we've got with us Zuzana Rogers from Runner's Edge, Alaska. She's a physical therapist who specializes in mastering the master runner, and we'll ask her what a master runner is in a bit. As a reminder, if you have questions, there's a Q&A window at the bottom. Just type in your question in the chat window. And then when we get to the end, toward the end of the webinar, we'll go through those in order and answer questions that might pop up. So with that, welcome, Zuzana. Is it Zuzana, or how do you pronounce that?
It can be Zuzana, it can be Susanna, it doesn't matter.
Okay, it's a great, it's spelled Z-U-Z-A-N-A. It's the first time I've ever seen the name. It's a wonderful name. Welcome to the Lost Lake Run webinar, and thank you for coming in.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to this for a long time.
That's great. I always start off each webinar with what I call the origin story. It's where you tell me, like, you know, where I was born and raised here, and kind of the major milestones in your life that led to the point where you are today. So tell us about Zuzana.
My goodness, Patrick, how many hours do we have?
We got till 9 or 10.
Well, as you can see, you can hear from my accent, I was not born in the United States. I was born in Czechoslovakia. That was a socialist country, and grew up during socialism. So one positive thing from socialism was the sports were very, very accessible. Both of my parents were athletes, master athletes, and skiers and runners, and we did a whole bunch of sports as kids. So when I was little, up to my teenage years, I did it all. I did ballet, I did gymnastics, I did figure skating, I did basketball, volleyball, tennis. And it just happened that I settled into downhill skiing. And that kind of led me into the World Cup level and Olympic level racing back home. And I was racing a national team back in Slovakia when Czechoslovakia split. And fortunately, I was not injured, but I was exposed to the trainers, the physical therapists, the massage therapists, and I really liked that back there. And maybe just like any other teenager, I had no idea what I was going to do. I wanted to ski, and I wanted to ski professionally. So what happened, I was recruited to ski for the University of Alaska in Anchorage when I was 21 or 20 years old. So I packed my bags and I said, Mom, Dad, I'm coming to Alaska and please let me go. And here I am, 26 years later. So my story is I skied for University of Alaska for 4 years. It was a Division I collegiate downhill ski school, and I actually did really well. And throughout my university years, I was getting exposed more and more to sports medicine, and I liked it more and more. I didn't know which part of sports medicine I was going to go into, but I really wanted to be in orthopedics, whether an orthopedic surgeon or maybe a chiropractor and maybe a physical therapist. So I did a lot of the shadowing work with orthopedic surgeons and talking to a lot of people, and then ended up really wanted to go to middle medical school or physical therapy school. And I'm telling you, that's the best decision I've ever made. I graduated from University of Washington in Seattle with Master's of Physical Therapy in 2003, and started working in really premier outpatient orthopedic manual therapy clinic in Anchorage. But as I tell all of my students, your learning does not stop when you graduate, it just starts. So from my graduation, I went in and get my clinical doctorate through Texas Tech University in Lubbock, Texas. And I graduated there in 2013. Then I went on to the sports physical therapy, and I actually did a 2-year sports medicine diploma through International Olympic Committee, and did a whole bunch of continuing education classes. And that actually really opened the door into sports physical therapy for me, and I just love it.
So you're actually Dr. Rogers.
Yes, but yeah,
Huh.
just call me Zuzana, please. Yes.
Okay, but you've earned that doctorate. I mean, if I got one, man, I'd be Doctor Everything. Um, so your interest in physical therapy came from your involvement in sports and running and skiing and these types of activities. Um, Now you're involved with the U.S. National Ski Team now. You mentioned that you got some accreditation and additional studies through the International Olympic Committee. What does that activity entail? What are you doing in that area?
So my work with the U.S. National Ski Team is a voluntary position, and I call it the hobby job. I absolutely love it, and I give it 150%. I've been with them for going on eighth season, I believe, and I covered Olympics in Pyeongchang and covered 3 world championships in cross country skiing. So what that entitles is my role really is when I'm traveling with the team, and I spend several weeks every year in the winter traveling with the team, we manage any tweaks that might happen during the season. We do a lot of recovery, massage, recovery body work, so they can absorb the training and they can recover from competition to be ready for the next competition. But on the other hand, I also serve as a consultant during the whole year. And my role then is really make sure that our athletes are able to train 100% and absorb all the training that is prescribed with minimal injuries. Because when you train on really high level, you have maybe 1 or 2 extra percent that you can get higher, right? So the training is so high level that training harder doesn't really get you in a higher level. It's the recovery and the recovery from all the tweaks and the injury prevention that gets you better. So that's my role with the U.S. National Ski Team, but also I am the physical therapist for APU ski team, which is local cross-country ski team, which has been rated best in the nation for several years. And I see these athletes more often. So I see them at the beginning of the season. We do movement screen, kind of the injury prevention. So we figure out how every single athlete is coming into the training season. And then I follow them and treat them throughout the season. So my involvement really is year round. It just happens that I think we have 8 athletes at the APU ski team that are part of the national team right now. So it's all interwoven into that involvement. So that's my hobby job. And my real job, I'm the clinical director of a niche physical therapy clinic called Runner's Edge Alaska. And we specialize really we empower people to continue being active and get them back into the activities. So I'm really immersed into the active Alaskan population, and I just love it.
So, gosh, lots of questions. And so let me go back to the Olympic piece for a moment. You said that one of your roles is to optimize the recovery to optimize performance. So what are the markers or indicators that you use? Do you look at flexibility, or do you use feedback from the runner? Is there blood markers or something that you look at? How do you determine if they're recovering fully? And how would you determine if maybe a runner could push a little bit harder with the given recovery program they already have?
That's a really good question, Pat. And there's so many different avenues that need to be explored to really being able to optimize the recovery. So the athlete is always the first person that we ask, how are you doing? What is bothering you? What do you feel that your body needs, from my perspective? So yes, I do look at some flexibility. I look at strength. I look at any kind of signs and symptoms of the neuromuscular fatigue, whether it is muscles not activating as quickly, not being as chipper, when you're jumping, when you're running, being fatigued. Many athletes overtax their certain muscle groups. So we see range of motion decrease in certain areas, maybe the shoulders, maybe the upper back, maybe the hips or ankles. So that requires different approach. We also travel with a physician. So we have a team doctor that monitors the blood levels of iron. They test the lactate, so all the physiological attributes that coming together. And then also the sleep. You know, sleep is so important for recovery. And if the athlete is so hyped up from competition, they can't sleep. So part of the massage therapy is really bring the system down and calm things down so they can sleep. So really, it really is independent on depending on the athlete, what they need. And also we do a lot of dry needling, almost like an acupuncture for somebody who doesn't know what it is. And that can be used for many different reasons. It can be used to calm the system down, but it also can be done to release the musculature and stimulate certain muscle groups. So it depends where we are, whether we are on a training camp, how many days to competition we have, or whether we have time to recover. That's how we approach the recovery.
So one of the things that has been a recurring theme, especially as an athlete who gets older, they get to know their body very well. And I'm certain that at the elite athlete level, they know it really well. And they start knowing that this part doesn't quite feel good, or I'm just not quite at 100%. I'm at, and they can almost give you a number. I'm like at 93% today. So do you find that as you become more and more in tune with your body, you're able to do a better job diagnosing those types of physical therapy or recovery techniques?
Absolutely, absolutely. And many athletes already have their own recovery routine that they go through, and the physical therapist or the massage therapist just supplements that.
Okay.
With younger athletes, we do a little bit more talking, a little bit more assessment, subjective assessment, so asking a lot of interview questions and then figuring out what part of the body needs the treatment. When we're dealing with injuries, I usually see the injuries. In cross-country skiing, we don't see many acute injuries like sprains and strains. We see a lot of overarching muscles and maybe stiffness related or fatigue related. So we address those as they come through.
I find all this so fascinating. So we better move on though. Tell me about what is a master runner? You mentioned in the title, Mastering the Master Runner. What's your definition of a master runner?
Surprisingly enough, master runner in literature, depending who you read, is considered anybody above 35 to 40 years old. So if you're over 40 years old, it's pretty much 95% sure that you're a master runner. And I'm not sure where their definition comes through, but from physiology and from physical therapy perspective, that is when the early stages of osteoarthritis start to sit in, when the muscle atrophy starts to happen, and we start seeing aches and pains that are very specific to this group of athletes rather than somebody who is 20 years old and younger. So just putting it all in perspective, everybody about 40 years old is considered master runner.
Now, because it is primarily skiing and running is, I imagine, similar, it's a repetitive action, a repetitive motion. Do you, when you're diagnosing these injuries and some of these problems, do you look at how the runner moves? And if you do, how do you do that? Do you put them on a treadmill or do you videotape them on a track? What's your process there?
We always look at how people move. My specialty, and every physical therapy specialty, is the movement of the system. So the initial, after our initial subjective interview, we always look how people move. And with Runner's Edge, where I work right now, it allows me to spend as much time as I need to with the athlete, and I actually take them out on trails. So we meet at runners at tracks or trails or even skiing. So I have a way to assess the real movement when they're a little bit fatigued. If that's not possible, I usually do treadmill or just do a little bit of bouts of running when I see them in person. So the initial stages of assessment is always looking for things that the naked eye can assess how they move. And then we gradually start to decompose the movement and look at certain body parts to figure out what is going on. That's one part of the assessment. And the other part of the assessment is actually a very detailed clinical exam to figure out what is going on. As a physical therapist with the training that I've had, I'm able to assess, is the pain coming from a joint, maybe intervertebral disc in the spine, or a nerve, or a certain muscle group. So I'm able to kind of look at the whole person and figure out what this body needs to get well.
And I'm constantly surprised when I hear people say, you know, I've got a problem in my hip, and they say, oh, it's because of the way you're placing your foot when you run. And it's like, it's not anywhere near your hip, it's all the way down your leg, but that compensation of the muscles and the chain of those things over time causes the hip problem. It's not necessarily, but it's the foot that needs to be adjusted. Do you see those kinds of things very often?
Absolutely. That's such a great point, Pat. And as we get older, the master runner, the change that happens to us is so small that we don't see day by day. But we might see it, you are able to hike flat top in the fall and do your winter, and then in the spring, you're not able to do that anymore because your knees hurt. So, and we don't realize what's happening unless we compare the activities. So yes, and what you see during exam, many times it's just a compensation for something else. So somebody who's got a hip problem, I do look at their footwear. I look at the wear and tear on their, actually, I pull out the insoles of their shoes and look at how the wear pattern is. I look at their spine, how it moves, and see if we can find any kind of compensatory movements and strength differences that might demonstrate itself as the hip pain or foot pain or whatever that is.
Oh, that's fascinating. So as we age, we, and you were saying these just little things over time add up to big things. It's interesting. I read a book called Atomic Habits by James Clear, and that can work in the positive too. His point is that if you make small positive changes and you are consistent with those small positive changes, they can lead to big changes over time as well. So it can work in both directions.
Absolutely.
Now, as we age, what are some of the things, I guess, first of all, what would be something you would recommend that we look for in terms of aging that says, hey, we probably should be addressing this issue now and not waiting for it to progress to a point where maybe we're causing really damaging joint or tendon problems? And then what would those changes be that you would recommend? Would it be a change in the program or the training cycle, or would it be cross training, or and maybe adding weight training or something else, water walking? So tell me, sorry, that's a lot of questions. I'll let you go.
No, those are all legitimate questions. So in perfect world, and I'm not saying we live in perfect world, the physical therapist is able to look at person, how they move, and assess every single joint in the body and figure out whether there is stiffness happening somewhere or there's a weakness in a certain muscle groups. And based on that, we should be able to predict how this might progress later on. So we might be able to catch a hip stiffness before it becomes problematic. So to answer your first question is, if a master runner is starting to see kind of persistent aches or persistent hitch in the hip or stiffness that does not go away, they should be able to look for a physical therapist that can help them assess that before it becomes an injury. And that is in the perfect world. And I like to compare it to the dentist, right? You go to the dentist twice a year to get your teeth cleaned. It should be able to get to a physical therapist to get your body and posture and range of motion and strength assessed so it doesn't develop into something more problematic. What was the other question? Would you remind me, Pat?
So now, let's say you've diagnosed and you predicted based on, you're saying you look at every joint, and based on how that joint's moving, you can predict where there might be a potential future failure, and then based on the feedback you're getting. Now, what would be the preventative piece that you would recommend to go in?
Yes. So from our perspective, we make a mistake of not strength training as we get older. because there might be that little bird back of my head. I shouldn't lift heavy weights because I'm going to hurt myself. And you mentioned that before. If you make small positive changes, the body will adapt. Now, the question is, what are those small positive changes? It may be a little bit of mobility first, and then start moving better, and then you add strength to the system. Or if you're moving pretty good, you can start adding strength to the system gradually. Now, gradually, that's the important word. We have to stay consistent with the training, and little by little, we should be able to add more weight. So, great example is, and maybe some of our listeners might be noticing that as they run, their gait, their stride becomes more shuffly, right? You're a little bit heavier on your feet, and you don't have the spring as you see in younger runners. Well, what happens, the muscle on the bottom of our calf, the soleus, is the first muscle in our body to atrophy as we age. Now, that muscle provides about 60% of our propulsion force. So that's the spring in your gait. If we don't train it, we're going to lose it. And it's gradual decline as we age. So in order to get back into the spring and running gait, we have to train that. And many people don't even know it exists. And many physical therapists don't know about it either. That needs to be trained. So the strength training, gradual adaptation, is bread and butter of what I do. It's empowering people to know, this is what I'm dealing with, this is where I need to be, and these are the steps that I need to take to get where I want to be. And that's very powerful.
This is a very fascinating and timely topic for me, because I'm very interested in, as we age, how our muscles are affected. And so there's a thing called sarcopenia, which is the degradation of our muscles and the nervous system that supports the muscles over time. I'm sure you've heard of this before, but that's kind of what they call it. So the question I would have for you is, if I'm an older person, let's say I'm in my 40s, and I've not done any weight training, now can I introduce weight training and kind of get back some of that spring in my step? Can I build it? And then the second follow-up question is, if I am consistent with my weight training and resistance training on those muscle groups, will my muscles still degrade, or have there's kind of like nothing we can do. We're still going to have a degradation of muscle, but can I, and if it does, how much does it slow it down, if you even know that? So I know that's a lot, but let's break it down if we can. That's a very interesting area.
Yes, it's fascinating. And the literature is just starting to look into what happens to our muscles as we age. We understand it more because we have better ways to measure this. Mm-hmm. And what happens? Let's take it way back to our teenage years, right? So we're building muscle mass, we're building cartilage, we're building tendon, we're building bone, all the way to about 20 years old. When we hit about 20, that's where the maturation slows down, and that's where the decline starts to happening. So it's about 1%. It depends on level of activity, but it's about 1 to 3% in certain muscle group that we start to decline. So our job, starting in our 20s and 30s, is to slow that down. And the way we slow it down is lifting heavy things carefully, right? And as somebody who hasn't weightlifted before, I strongly recommend getting somebody, maybe physical therapist or a trainer, to create that progression. So you cannot regain more cartilage, you cannot regain more bone, but more muscle, but you can make it more robust. You can slow the degradation down quite a bit. So what we strive to do, and as a physical therapist, we work with trainers really closely. We keep adding more and more weight to our clients' program, weightlifting program, to get them more robust. So yes, you can regain some of that spring in your gain. You can regain your deadlift weight. You can regain your squat if the progression is guided and progressively more difficult. So I would not recommend starting from zero and really loading 100 pounds on your back to do some squats, because you're going to hurt yourself. And that's very different than when we're teenagers. We could do that before. but having that gradual progression is really, really, really important.
Um, the what you just talked about though was interesting as well, because a lot of times people think about weight training and they're going in and they're picking up a dumbbell or they're going in and using a machine. And really what you're saying is basic compound movements, squats and deadlifts, where you're using a lot of muscles and your musculature and you know, and it doesn't necessarily have to be, as you said, introducing a heavy weight at the beginning, but those are taxing movements even with body weight. So
Absolutely.
yeah, that's fascinating. So
You know, and one thing I would add to that is you really have to deserve your strength training. So your body has to be ready for that. And the compound movements like deadlifts, single leg squats or squats are difficult on the whole body. So if somebody's not ready for it, we break it down and we do put them on machines, break down the movement, maybe do the quadriceps first, the hamstrings second on machine, and then put it all together. And that's very similar to when I retrain complex movements like cross-country skiing or running or going up and down stairs after an injury. We break it down and then put it back together.
So do you work usually side by side with a trainer in the program, or do you have certain trainers you recommend that you can say to the trainer, they're introducing, you know, they're starting off and they're a runner, and do you find trainers are able to look at the athlete and do the assessment that you do and design a program that works for them? Or do you find that sometimes maybe trainers, if they're not selected correctly, can actually do more harm than good?
You know, it really depends on the relationship our clients have with their trainers. And many times, maybe yourself too, you've been working with somebody for many years and that person knows you. So if something, maybe you're doing your squats and your squat became asymmetrical, the trainer should be able to pick it up. So to answer your question, I don't really have trainers that I work with side by side, but I always ask the client what is their preference. And if they have somebody they work with really well, then we can do a session, all three of us together, and then the trainer will take that. If somebody doesn't have one, I have certain people that I trust and I can refer our clients to kind of create a seamless transition from the physical therapy to maintenance and progression in the strength training. So it really depends. It takes team to take care of the athlete, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's again, it's the couple of the key things in here that you're going to hear over and over again from a physical therapist and someone who is really an elite athlete is consistency. Consistency is so critical. I mean, with resistance training, it's small changes, but those small changes are only effective if those small changes occur consistently over time, and you're progressively overloading the muscle and causing it to adapt in the tendons and the tissue itself. And so I think that part is really critical as we age. It just seems natural. But how much of your training program or physical therapy should be weight training, and how much should be, say, running or skiing if those are your activities?
Great question, Pat. And what we usually recommend, somebody working up to about 2 sessions a week of strength training in addition to their running or skiing. So that's kind of the maintenance program. Sometimes we add a third training session per week if they're recovering from an injury or something needs to be strengthened. I don't recommend more than that because then it can add too much to their training routine. And talking about master athletes, we have lives, we have jobs and families. So it's not just adding more, it's more being smart about the training that they do.
And the recovery too, right? I mean, if you're
Absolutely.
in the gym 3 days a week, weight training, and you're out on the road 4 or 5 days a week, your body is going to have a difficult time to recover from all of that stress. So what I'm hearing is, as we age, there's certain things that you want to do. And one of the things we talked about already is that we want to we want to examine our bodies and our movement early. And like, I love this analogy you use with the dentist. If you go to the dentist twice a year, why wouldn't you go to a physical therapist twice a year? It does make sense. What are some of the other things that, as we age, that you would say help longevity in the career of a runner and a skier?
So one we already talked about is the consistency and the strength training. The other thing, being really aware of your body. And we might notice during periods of some stress, the higher work, when we sit a lot, the back can ache, the hips can ache, we decondition a little bit. So just really being aware what your body is doing. And if there's pain somewhere that is persistent and is not going away, especially during several days, several weeks after training, you get that little feeling like something's not quite right. You better get it checked out before it becomes a problematic issue.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so, what are some of these? You know, we had set up a set of questions earlier, but I love the one that you posed. And so, what are some of the misconceptions and big changes over the past 15 years in how we understand running and injury prevention? I usually don't read the questions verbatim, but that is so specific. But it's really important. I think as runners and as athletes and people in their master class, they have been in that activity for so long. I'm certain that they picked up misconceptions that they now take as truth. What are some of those that you've seen?
Yeah, and it's maybe not that we were doing it wrong. It's just now the research has become so good that we know exactly what we need to do for what issue. And one of the misconceptions is stretching. We always feel like where you're standing on the start line and the person next to you is stretching their hamstrings. What do you do, right? You get nervous before the start. So of course you start stretching and the next person starts stretching. Now we know that the muscles, in order for them to work appropriately, they need to be really springy into that range that you need to use them as a runner. And as a runner, you don't need to be a gymnast flexible, you need to be runner flexible. So overstretching muscles makes them really long and relatively weak. So you want to make sure that the muscles are activated and warm, but not overstretched. And that's one of the misconceptions maybe we're moving away from stretching before the race. I more recommend more ballistic movements to warm up the joints, warm up the muscle groups in towards the activities that you're going to be doing, whether it's running uphill, downhill, karaoke, sideways, hip swing, something like that. So we're moving away from stretching before the race. But if a person needs to be improving their mobility, say hips or thoracic spine, so those are the mobility exercises that are actually okay to do to improve performance, but they should be carefully guided by somebody who knows what they're doing, just like physical therapists or maybe a massage therapist too. So that's one big misconception. However, though, we don't recommend not stretching at all. Stretching, when it's guided, is really important to maintain the mobility, and usually recommending it after the race or after training, after the person's warmed up. But again, they need to be really smart about it and improve mobility in places when that's needed. And many times we feel like, and maybe you have as well, the hip flexors. All my hip flexors are so tight, so we overstretch them, but they might be weak, and that's why they feel tight, because muscle, if it's weak, it works really, really hard and it feels tight, versus it might not be actually tightened up. It's the same with hamstrings. It's the same with calves. When they're overtaxed because of the work we're asking them to do, if they're not ready for that work, they're just going to feel tight, and we feel like we need to stretch them, versus we need to strengthen them to make them feel better.
Wow. So I'm part of that same group. I grew up a swimmer, and when we warmed up before a race, we just stretched. I didn't even think everybody did it. You know, you got down, you did this stretch and that stretch, and there was 5 or 6 of them you did.
Right, but for swimming, it's maybe different because you do need that range of motion. I mean, talking about range of motion of the shoulder and your upper back, you need to have that, but you might not need that much range of motion in your hips. So you probably don't need to stretch your hamstrings or your quads when you go swim racing.
Yeah, and it mostly was upper body. And I think about, although lower back was one that we did quite a bit too. We mentioned massage, and we've had other guests before that we've talked about massage. I should get a massage therapist to come in and talk about what they do with the program. But I'm wondering, what is the benefits of massage? Does it help with recovery? Does it help with mobility? Um, what do you see as the benefit of a massage?
All of the above. We use as a ski team and also in the clinic in Runner's Edge, we have a massage therapist that they're really skilled in calming the system down. And you yourself might be spending hours on the computer and your shoulders are by your ears, right? You just feel like
Sure.
you want to
Yeah,
bring that down.
right here.
But it's not just it's not just the position of your shoulders, but it heightens the sympathetic nervous system when you feel like you can't relax. And many of our athletes get really anxious after the race when you feel like your muscles just can't relax. Well, massage therapists can do that. The other massage therapy benefit is it brings circulation into the areas that they need it. So massage therapy really doesn't stretch the fascia, doesn't stretch the muscles, but it really brings the circulation, the blood flow into the tight muscle groups, and the person just feels relaxed. So that two benefits, right? There's another one, and after Mount Marathon, for example, or after the Lost Lake run, when it's this gradual downhill, people come down to the finish and their quads, the front of the legs are just shot. Well, what you get that eccentric contraction of the muscles creates micro damage, micro tears of the muscle fibers, and they swell up. Massage therapy can really bring that swelling down and allow the body to start healing itself right away. So there are many, many, many different benefits of massage.
Wow. So it sounds like having massage therapy is if you're especially, it sounds like if you're suffering from some kind of chronic injuries, that it would be a great benefit. One of the things, and we hadn't talked about this, but it came to mind, and I've seen this in other literature, is hot cold, where they will use heat and cold. And in particular, I think if we watch football, you usually see the athlete after the game sitting in an ice bath. And so are there benefits to that, or is that an old wives' tale as well?
There are definite benefits from it. And even in Alaska, when it's not that hot, you see people finishing Mount Marathon or the Lost Lake run, and they go sit in the creek to calm their muscles down, to bring that micro damage that might occur in the muscle, they bring that under control. And there is research that's saying that cold water immersion immediately after the activity, it should be within 24 to 48 hours, actually speeds up the recovery. So the muscles don't get as sore as they would without. And in perfect world, just like what you mentioned with the football teams, they would have a big tub of ice water and they would go sit in it to recover their muscles after hard sprinting intervals. And that's what the recovery is after hard interval activity, just like that. So that's the benefit of ice in recovery, cold water for recovery. Ice after injury is also beneficial, but short term. And another misconception that we will talk about is that RICE that we always do, rest, ice, compression, elevation after the injury. Well, now we start learning how exactly the body recovers. For example, after ankle sprain, it's the peace and love right now that tells you more about how much to load it. Icing only is important for 24 to 48 hours because you want to slow down the inflammatory process, but you want to allow your body to start rebuilding it right away. And this happens within 24 hours. Your muscle fibers, your collagen fibers starts connecting right away. So you won't allow that. You don't want to freeze it. You don't want to slow that down. So ice becomes less important if it's more than 24 to 48 hours after the injury. And you wanna get that movement going. And so I don't know exactly right now on top of my head what the peace and love stands for, but that's the new way of managing injuries. It's the gradual loading, to slow down the inflammation, but not completely restrict that, allow the body to heal that. And it's a gradually in getting back to activities that's important.
So getting quote unquote back on your feet, if you will,
Yeah,
immediately or as soon as you can is actually beneficial then.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I'll be
Unless there's something really wrong, like a fracture or bad ankle sprain that needs more intervention than that. But I would really target that gradual return to activities. Now, you mentioned heat as well. Heat is on the other side of the spectrum. So what does heat do? When you go to sauna, you feel that blood flow going through your body, right? Your skin is red because all the capillaries just open up. So for me, prescribing heat is for somebody who's suffering from maybe osteoarthritis. Maybe they have stiffness rather than acute injury. So low back pain, for example, the heat is much better because it brings the circulation to the muscle and tends to relax the muscles a little bit better.
Is there any difference between a steam bath and a sauna, dry heat and wet heat?
Probably, but I don't know the exact ones. People prefer either sauna or dry or the wet heat, more
And
heat.
and is
Some
a
people prefer the hot tub.
hot tub, I was going to ask, is a hot tub also an alternative? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
My wife and
absolutely.
I prefer the hot tub. It's
Yeah,
fun.
I like sauna better than a hot tub. It's all individual based.
You know, my wife often will go to the gym and she'll feel like she's cold, like she just can't quite. She's not ready to exercise. You know, and sometimes you do that. So she'll go sit in the sauna for a little bit, warm up,
Yeah,
so to speak, truly warm up, and then she's like raring and ready to go. Is that something
yeah,
that makes sense?
yeah. It totally makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. It sounded right to me too. Um, Kit, you mentioned arthritis earlier. Is arthritis something you can get from running?
Great question. So here we're looking at massive amount of people, and you might have somebody who is sedentary and wants to start running. Then you might have people who've been running recreational for a long time, and then you have the really high level athletes. So there've been recent studies that show that people who are sedentary and people who are in that really Olympic level, running twice a day, many miles, are at higher risk of getting arthritis. The sedentary population is actually at the highest risk of getting arthritis. The people who are at the lowest risk of getting symptomatic arthritis are the recreational runners. And there are recent research that is showing that the cartilage, if it's going through cyclical loading, just like with running, it actually can regenerate some.
Oh,
So running is actually showing being very beneficial to cartilage health and regeneration, bone strength and joint strength. And then the really elite level, but also you don't want to rest too much. You don't want to be a couch potato to prevent arthritis from happening, because it actually happens the opposite way. So one of the questions that we get from our aging athletes is they go to somebody, and maybe a physician that might not know the benefits of running, with arthritic knees, and they take x-ray and they say the space narrowing between the femur and the tibia, showing that there might be some arthritis setting in. And they tell them, well, your knees are arthritic, you should stop running.
mm,
And as runners, we know that that is like a death sentence to us. We really want to continue to get back to what we really like to do. So, and that actually sets people into that arthritis journey, because they stop running, they stop loading their knees, and the arthritis sets in. So to get them back into being able to walk and run and hike, we talked about it before, is the gradual and systematic loading, range of motion, and strengthening to get them back. And I've had many clients that came to me with worn out knees, and we got them into a mobility program where we improved the range of motion of whole their body with our soft tissue techniques. And we have hands-on techniques as physical therapists that we can mobilize the joint to improve the mobility, and the gradual strengthening, and suddenly they feel fine, and they're running without pain.
wow,
So
wow.
it's fascinating, and that's kind of where I kind of got into with Runner's Edge Alaska, addressing the arthritic knees and arthritic hips and backs and then tendon injuries, with master runners, because there is a way to get them back to do. It just has to be very consistent and gradual.
Wow. So if you are listening to this and you're a person that has quote unquote bad knees or your hips, they need to come see you because it sounds to me like you could actually develop a program. Now, you mentioned it's slow over time. We're probably talking of a progression of months or years, right? I mean, this isn't weeks or days.
Right. Yes. It's slow and gradual.
Yeah.
Yes. And the other thing I want to mention is many times you go to the physician and they take x-rays. And on the x-ray, you might see arthritis developing, you might see bone spurs, you might see misalignment. But what's really, really, really important is take the x-ray and correlate that what you're actually feeling in the clinical findings. And many times these don't match, especially, 3/4 of the population, these don't match. And you see arthritis on x-ray while the person has no symptoms at all. And you might see somebody with relatively healthy knees that have a lot of pain. So that has to be looked into a little bit deeper to figure out why this is happening and get that person with very little radiological changes on x-ray with a lot of pain, get them to the level they're actually okay with the activity that they're doing.
When you do your initial assessment, do you like to have x-rays available so you can do that?
It depends. Many times our clients bring their x-rays with them just to make sure that they understand what's happening. But a lot of our initial session really is education comparison to get people on the way of thinking that, yes, I can get better. I'm not doomed for the rest of my life.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. What a great message to send out is that, if you feel like you have arthritic knees, you can still be a runner. There's a way to do that. Oh, that's wonderful. Um, what are some of the common mistakes you see runners making?
A lot of them are training errors.
Mm-hmm.
And many of us do that. I do that too. I mean, the weather outside is beautiful. The blueberries are on. The trails are dry. You feel like going for a long run. And if you feel good, you just keep going. Or you're going with a friend that is maybe a little bit better and you're trying to keep up without the appropriate training. And the next day, you really feel it in your back, your hips, your knees. So many mistakes are related to training errors. Or we change something too much too quickly. You get new pair of shoes, your shiny new shoes, and they're different than what you've been wearing, and you take them for a 20-mile run. Of course, you're going to get not injured, but you're going to feel it the next day. So my message is make changes gradual and only change one thing at a time. What that means is if you're running on trails in Kincaid and you're buying new shoes, go ahead and try those new shoes at the same distance, same trails as you would in the old shoes, and see how your body does with that, because the adaptation will happen, but it just takes some time. Or if you're in the spring after your ski season, when you're trying to run on trails and run in the mountains, start gradually. Start with maybe level trails and start getting up higher. Don't hike and run Bird Ridge right away because you're going to feel it next day. So those are the big things. And the other things too is not listening to your body. Running or training through pain, especially persistent pain that is not getting addressed. So, and not getting enough sleep, not getting enough recovery, which is really, really important as we age. And with recovery comes nutrition as well.
Yeah, we haven't even touched on nutrition, and I know it's a big piece. My wife and I are big fans of Max Lugavere's books about, he calls them genius foods, but he spends quite a bit of time talking about why he thinks some foods are good for us and why there's a whole class of foods that aren't. We just don't have time today, but I feel like when you're working with a person, you have to be holistic, I would imagine. You can't just look at the joint mobility. You got to look at, like you're saying, recovery, sleep. What are you eating? When do you do what you do? And taking the whole picture into play and then adjusting that one thing at a time until you get to the point where you've optimized performance.
Exactly. And as I said, it takes team to take care of our clients. So even though Runners Edge Alaska is really small clinic, we have a massage therapist and a physical therapist. We communicate with the coaches, with trainers, with the nutritionists, sports psychologists. So everybody kind of comes together and addresses that one person. And it's been so effective, and people love that.
The local CF clinic, probably over a decade, maybe longer, went to that type of a clinic atmosphere for what they call clinic visits. Their quarterly visits for the CF kids are now CF adults because it's no longer childhood disease. And they would come in and they would actually spend the better part of a day, and they have a respiratory therapist and a nutritionist. And there would be somebody that'd be there for the psychological, usually called a counselor. You'd have somebody there that would address if there was diabetic needs. They would be talking about the diabetes because CF-induced diabetes is very, very common. And then at the end of all of that, then you would see the primary care doctor, the usually a respiratory doctor. And for Providence, it's been Dr. Dion Roberts for years and years, who I just love. I just think he's the greatest guy ever. Anyway, I'm hoping that at some point in the future, if someone is out there and listening and can have any kind of influence with Dr. Roberts, I'd love to have him come and talk to us about the 30 years he spent treating the population of Alaskans with cystic fibrosis. I've diverged. So we've talked about rest and recovery, training errors, massage, the effective aging, the implications of arthritis. There's so many things we've covered today, but what would be that one most important message you'd like to send out as we close?
Well, the message from me would be keep moving and listen to your body. Don't make too many changes, too many quick changes, but keep moving, keep going, and listen to your body. If you feel that something's out of alignment, out of range, just ask for help. There's so many people out there, they can help you before that issue becomes a painful issue.
Wonderful message. I love that. Let me check really quickly. I don't see any questions in the chat. If someone wants to reach you, we'll be able to put contact information in the description for the YouTube channel. Absolutely. Okay, great. And also on Facebook.
And we actually have a lot of free information on our website, runnersedge.physio. There, I write blogs, and our massage therapist writes blogs, and there's, I think there's an ebook that they can download. So there's lots of free information to the community that can get them just a step further to being well. And then if that, for whatever reason, doesn't answer all the questions, just go ahead and reach out. There are links to our website you can reach out through, or you can email me directly, and Pat's going to put the email address in. It is Zuzana at runnersedge.physio.
And that's PHYSIO, physio.
PHYSIO.
Yeah, that's because so many of us see .com or .edu or but that information will definitely be there. And thank you for allowing us to use your email address, and they can contact you directly. And thank you for putting those kinds of resources out available to people so that they can go in and get smarter and learn more in advance of coming in and getting treatment. That's wonderful. I don't think that's very common. I think that's atypical. So
yeah, I don't think so. We like to reach out to the community, and if anybody has more questions, we offer free discovery visits through phone. So I like to talk to people on the phone just to figure out where they are in their recovery and what really is needed, because a lot of people out there, they just don't know what's available. Somebody might have a head pain or knee pain, but it's not significant enough to go to a physical therapist or a doctor to get assessed. So we like to talk to people and just really get them understanding where they are and what needs to happen to get them well.
One of the things that is a joy in my life is meeting people who are passionate about what they do, and you are clearly passionate about physical therapy. Thank you so much today for spending time and telling us about physical therapy and as we age, things that we can do. I appreciate it so much. Thank you, Zuzana.
Thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed that.